Good afternoon. It is now 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 16th, and I can now call the Planning Commission meeting for the town of Cave Creek, Arizona to order. We can begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So today is a workshop. I think we can begin with the zoning administrator's report.
Certainly, Chairman Breckner, Vice Chair Miller, members of the commission. So outlined within the zoning administrator report is the future meetings that we have for for May, September, and October. June through August, we won't have any meetings. In May, we'll bring forward to you the zoning ordinance text amendment, public hearings for undisturbed and landscape requirements in commercial zones, accessory living quarters in R18, R35 zones, and Chapter 7 hillside provisions. So those will be public hearings where we will be bringing the cases before y'all and for you to take a vote on whether for the recommendation to go to council. In September, this is something that Eric could probably go in more in light too, since it's a majority of it will be his cases. But in preparation for general plan amendment and rezoning for the public hearings for planning commission dates, we will be preparing to do the neighborhood meeting as a requirement for the general plan amendment and rezones. But Eric, if you want to touch more on that, you can. If not, if it's pretty straightforward and
Yeah, just the plan will be ready to go for the planning commission public hearing for those rezones and general plan amendments in September. So we'll spend a bunch of time over summer getting the neighborhood meetings and all the other requirements from state law out of the way. So we'll be ready to go.
Over the summer.
Oh, yeah, in September. And then October for council, hopefully.
The neighborhood meetings will be over the summer.
correct.
Yeah.
And then we will bring the case before you in September. And
Right.
then
Will those take place here?
the neighborhood meetings,
Yeah.
more than likely, yes. Mhm. Then in October, we just have another zoning text amendment that we plan to bring before you, which is the amending section 3.5 commercial use table. With the meetings in September and October occurring, if there happens to be an opportunity where you all would like to meet and discuss, or maybe even do another workshop, certainly can. That's entirely up to Chairman Breckner, Vice Chair Miller, members of the commission, but it's not necessarily required. But that's something that we could look into as well in preparation for those meetings to give further guidance. But at this moment, that's all we really have. Is there any questions regarding the future meetings?
Nope.
Okay. And again, those will be public hearings today. What we're bringing before you is this is a workshop, so there's nothing that's going to be voted on. It's just two items that were asked to be brought back through a work session and give more clarification and provide more information on certain items, which is going to be the accessory living quarters for R18 and R35 and the hillside provisions. So that's what today's meeting's about. So Chairman Breckner, sorry to jump into that, but
No, I was just gonna say that that's our one thing today. I will say for the record, we do have a quorum, but we're four commissioners today. We have Commissioner Lamar, Wedge, and Spitzer not with us today. But with that, you can go ahead with those two items.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get into the first one, which was more information about the accessory living quarters in R18 and R35, which we introduced at last month's meeting. So currently, as we highlighted in last month's meeting, accessory living quarters are allowed in desert rural zoning districts, but many of the desert rural properties do not have accessory living quarters. So when we talk about R18 and R35, that's something to remember is that just because we would potentially allow them does not necessarily mean all of them or the majority of the lots would get accessory living quarters. And part of the reason why we're looking to do this is that in recent years, the town has received interest from a handful of property owners in these zoning districts and looking to potentially build an accessory living quarters. And so our zoning ordinance sets the requirements for accessory living quarters. The first requirement is that the maximum gross floor area can't exceed 50% of the principal residence. So the example again is if that main residence, the gross floor area is 3,000 square feet, the accessory living quarters can't exceed 1,500 square feet. And then it also must be served by the same driveway, as well as share single common electric and water meters. And then they still have to meet the bulk regulations of the zoning ordinance. So that means building setbacks and lot coverage they must meet. So in R35, the setbacks are 40 feet front and rear, 20 feet on the sides. R18, that's 30 feet front and rear, 10 feet on the sides, except if it's a corner lot, it's 20-foot side setback. And then the lot coverage, which is the maximum area of a lot that can be occupied by covered structures for R18 zones is 25%, and R35 zones is 20%. So here is just a
I have
little.
one question.
Yeah, go for it.
On the other screen, for R35 and R18 lots, are there any other dimensional requirements? In other words, minimum width, minimum length.
Chair, yes. All R18, R35 lots do have a minimum lot width, and I can pull that up in my zoning ordinance. I want to say off the top of my head, it's somewhere in the ballpark of 125 feet as the width, but let me verify that.
Is
So-
that minimum or maximum?
Minimum. So the minimum lot width in R18 is 120 feet. The minimum lot width in R35 is 145 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we have currently an inventory of R18 and R35 properties?
We have a map, actually 2 slides down from now, that's the location of all of them. And so when we did an inventory, we had to approximate it because about 600, because when you go into a lot of these, like Rancho Manana are PUGs, and there's a few that
Right.
are R35, but they're tracks and things like that. So,
Right.
but the best number we got is about 600. And you have to also factor in that Hidden Canyon behind Town Hall here is R35 and R18, and that's 48 more lots potentially.
Right.
And then that's not factoring in if lots do in the future get subdivided, which again, most of these are already developed. I would say that
Right.
90+%.
So do we have an inventory of undeveloped? I mean, like, for example, we have that and then pieces.
Chair, I can get you definitely for the next meeting
I would
of
love that.
a
Yeah.
full inventory of the vacant remaining lots as
Yeah.
well as what that build out or maximum it could be.
Because that,
Yeah.
in my mind, that might play into this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally something I can do. And yeah, just go and look at this map again. Like looking at Rancho Manana on there, Black Mountain Shadows, those are subdivisions that have really tight development envelopes where something like an accessory living quarters may not even be feasible because they already have strict development restrictions.
Mhm.
But yeah, this map kind of shows the locations of them where the majority are located here in the town core. Really on the foothills of Black Mountain is where most of them are located, and off of Cave Creek Road. And then there's a few stragglers down by Carefree Highway as well.
Did you want to stay on that?
Oh, yeah, I just want to go back to the last slide, which this is the proposed text. It's really simple from staff's perspective from the text amendment, because all we would be doing is changing the language to saying they're prohibited to saying they're allowed, and that they must follow the already existing accessory living quarters requirement, which is on the right-hand side in Appendix A of the zoning ordinance. And that's kind of what I went over. It's a little hard to see, but basically it just says that what I highlighted earlier, which is that they need to be shared by the same driveway, single common water and electric meters, and then that 50% gross floor requirement. And then it defines accessory living quarters, just again, how you would think of a guest house where it has the combination of eating, living, sleeping facilities.
But now, given that these are smaller lots than Desert Rural, which allows it, if we wanted to basically make any further adjustments, we could. So for example, if we wanted the ADU to be attached to the main residence or within a certain distance, we could do that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this last slide I just pulled up is an example. So this is an existing DR43 property. So DR43, remember, is 43,000 square feet is the minimum lot size. That's what this lot is. R35, remember, is a little bit smaller. 35,000 square feet is the minimum lot size in R35. So pretty similar to R35. R18 is a lot smaller, 18,000 square feet. So just keep that in mind. But this is an example. So the red dash is showing the building setbacks of 40 feet front and rear, 20 feet sides. And then you can see that it's served by the same driveway coming off of the southwest. And then this lot also shares the same water and electric meters. And then you can see it also maintains that minimum 2-to-1 ratio size requirement.
Now, the one thing I recall from the prior slide is the lot coverage
Mhm.
is greater.
Correct. Yeah, this one, because it's DR43, it's 15%. So that's why we put that one. Yeah, but let's say this was R35, it would be 20%. So in theory, they could have another, let's
Right,
say,
so,
accessory building.
So on R35,
Mhm.
here we have 6534,
Mhm.
but they actually are allowed 7,000.
Correct. If it was R35, we also have to remember that the lot would probably be a little bit smaller. So it'd probably be a smaller number. Or
Well,
pretty similar.
35,000 times 20%, if I do my math, is 7,000.
7,000. Yeah.
And here it's 6534. So you can actually have more crammed on less in
That-
R35.
Correct. I mean, technically, yes, you are correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So we may want to look at that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is there a reason that you came up with the number of 50%? That the accessory dwelling unit can be up to 50% of the primary residence?
That's been established in our zoning ordinance for as long as we've really had the accessory living quarters in there. So the reasoning behind it, I'm not sure. I think Luke would know a
Probably
little
taken
more
from
detail.
other jurisdictions.
And yeah, it's definitely
My
something we
guess.
probably did.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we
It would
have
not
the
be
ability to look
right.
at any of that.
Yes.
Well, it's, Chair, or Commissioner Nasson, it's 50% of the gross floor area of the main dwelling unit. So meaning that you can't just do a 2-story guest house, that because then you're counting the gross floor area for that. So if you have 1,000 that you're limited to, and then you do 1,000 at the first floor and 1,000 on the second floor, then that means you have 2,000, which means it would not be compliant. So they take it off gross floor area, but we can definitely look into the previous zoning ordinances and see when that actually came into full effect. But it's been that way for quite some time, though.
I think it'd be worth doing that. Understand,
Yeah.
where did it come into play?
Mhm.
Why
It's
not?
just with something like this, if you have 7,000, you could have a 4,650 square foot primary residence and a 2,325
Mhm.
square foot.
It's all depends on the lot sizes. I mean,
Smaller lot. Yeah.
Mhm.
yes, it all depends on how many R35s zoning or R35 zone parcels are over an acre. That one, I don't know how many
It wouldn't need to be, because
for the $7,000 for $7,000, 7,000 lot coverage, square foot lot coverage. That's what you're referring to, correct?
that's
The minimum lot
size
sizes are 35.
Minimum size of a 35 lot at 35,000 square feet. The maximum lot coverage is 7,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can look into, as well as R18, because doing math, 25% of 18,000 square feet is about just under 5,000 would be my number. So yeah, we
That's a lot.
can do some calculations and see what that looks
Especially,
like.
it may logistically be impossible for some of the hidden canyon, because as I recall, some of those lots have on-site retention.
We'll share that. That's
for drainage.
something that is also interesting. When you factor in that it has to meet the setbacks, it has
And the
to meet
on-site
retention requirement,
drainage.
has to meet septic, they're likely going to have a hard time meeting that.
Unless they get a variance. So we might be asking for variances here.
Variance in what aspect, Chairman?
Lot coverage, setbacks, you name it, to try and
To cram it
Yeah,
into the setbacks or to,
into the setback.
It would have to meet those criteria, right? It'd have to have some crazy topographical challenges or
unusual.
things like that, where like if Hidden
Built
Canyon,
wood.
but if those lots were platted in the town and they meet the minimum lot size, a variance wouldn't really be in play
well, and
because it wouldn't meet the criteria of it, because it would be self-imposed in that instance.
You have to have some sort of hardship.
correct. And the main thing, Chairman Breckner, is nothing states that they have to do up to 50%. This just gives them the ability to do a guest house. They can do a 500 square foot guest house if they please. Nothing saying in the ordinance that you have to do up to 50%. You're just allowed up to 50%
Yeah.
to do a guest house. So that's entirely up to them if they'd like to do so.
Totally get that.
Mhm.
I just think we can't apply the same DR going straight to I think that's where we're all getting to. We just need to
Yeah.
tailor this.
We
to
might need to,
our.
Would there be a suggestion, Chairman Breckner, Vice Chair Miller, members of the commission to possibly create a number, a different percentage number as opposed from 50%, maybe 30%, 20%, something?
yeah,
Yeah.
I honestly, I haven't thought about this until today.
Yeah.
But just hearing this and looking at some of these screens cursively, quickly, these are the thoughts that are coming to my mind, at least, is like, what's good for one may not be good.
Sure. And that's what we want to avoid is we can't touch what's existing, their prior rights of lot coverage, but we can touch the accessory living quarters
Exactly.
specifically. So we can maybe think about, is there a size requirement we want to impose, additional setbacks, things like that. We definitely can look into and yeah, if you guys have any input, we'd love to hear it. So
Okay.
And I think the main goal overall is just to allow the ability to have a guest house. Again, I just want to stress that that's the main goal, is to give the ability to have a guest house. Nobody is tying them to do
Yeah.
a large guest house. And if they have a 5,000 square foot guest house and they take the lot cover, main residence, yeah, of
Yeah.
course we do the numbers, but nobody's telling them they have to do that large of a guest house.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just thinking about
No, understood.
unforeseen
Consequences.
absolutely. And then I would recommend driving through the subdivisions kind of across the street to kind of look at, those are the typical lots, where it's like there's already existing house, that there a lot of them are gonna have
I
challenges
get
with,
it.
yeah.
I'm only sensitive to this because when this town first added zoning, my parcel is 1 acre parcel that was zoned in the county, 1 acre parcel, and our town in its wisdom zoned it as a DR 89. So I'm a legal non-conforming. And then one of my neighbors, all my neighbors are the same, except the 10.6 acre parcel directly next to me that got somehow zoned R35. And it's completely undeveloped, and it's right as the gateway to Spur Cross Road into Spur Cross. And so we do have parcels that this type of stuff can come into play. So,
Understood.
Yeah.
So that's all I had on the accessory living quarters. I'll turn over to Stephen unless there's any other questions about this specific item before we bring it back. And
Yeah. One other question on this. Is there any preference or experience you guys have from whether these accessory units are connected to the house or have a certain setback from the house? Because like in Scottsdale, they have to be 10 feet away. And some other ones, they want them connected or at least have a roof line that shares them, or, like Paradise Valley's that way on some buildings. I don't know if we have anything like that or if there's any purpose or point to it other.
that's a good question.
Is it something that we look at with this?
Yeah, and I think part of the reason we don't have anything like that is because what's currently allowed is on such large lots where it wouldn't affect anyone if it's detached, attached, And so with it being smaller lots, we can look at the comparable municipalities, see if they have a distance requirement and things like that for these zoning districts. But yeah, as far as our zoning ordinance goes, that's not something that we have in place right now. But it's interesting because when you factor in the setbacks they have to meet in R18, R35, they still are relatively significant. So if you have those distance requirements and things like that, we want to, you can't, I guess, it's tough to figure out what the best distance would be and things like that.
Yeah,
So-
I guess. Yeah, that'd be the question. I mean, what's the benefit of any of that stuff? But
Were you referring, Vice Chair Miller, to the distance from the main residence, the maximum distance? Yeah, when I worked with Coconino County, there was a maximum distance from the main residence if you're going to do a guest house. Main reason was to not make it appear as if the lot had two different houses on it. So the maximum distance for larger, I think if you're over 2 acres, was 60 feet. If you were, in this case, under an acre, 10 feet was the maximum distance you could go from a building. So, I mean, we could definitely look into certain options in that aspect. Again, I guess right now is just more of, if anything, what I have noted is to bring an inventory of a map with vacant and developed properties with R35, R18 zones. Possibly look into a percentage number for livable area for R35, R18 zones as opposed from 50%. And then I guess would we make that another item to look into, possibly a maximum distance from the main dwelling for a guest house? I mean,
Maximum distance, whether it's attached, whether it's shared.
Yeah,
same
I think
roof
just-
line, you know, these things.
is that, so that's something you'd like us to probably get creative and put into.
Yeah, I think that's all helpful. And that could potentially impact, the square footage,
Mhm,
you know,
definitely.
because if it's attached, you know, we already have a lot coverage, maybe that makes us more inclined to have a larger percentage for the ADU of the primary if it's attached,
Mhm.
that type of thing.
That was restricted into the building.
Well,
It-
less restrictive as to the percentage,
Mhm.
depending, these are all things I haven't thought about, but you know, considering the size of the lot, stuff for us to at least think about.
Understood. So those are the items that I had. Are there any other items possibly that you'd like us to look into or any other recommendations before we move forward? Since this is a workshop, just trying to make sure that we've crossed, I just have those three items listed from based off what we talked about at this moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I haven't looked at this, so it's like I think I could probably answer some of these questions on my own, but maybe we can at least talk about them. But like, if there's some sort of graphic or something that illustrates, maybe this will lead some of our decisions on what this percentage needs to be. But you're kind of balancing your lot coverage with this 50% of the primary residence. Well, it's like, I don't know, the house is 6,000 square foot and you're putting a 3,000. Well, do you already exceed your lot coverage by, um, you like wouldn't be able to do the 3,000 or something, like there
Mhm.
might be a little bit of work. One nulls the other one out. So I'm curious, like if there's some sort of graphic that kind of drives us into, figuring out what the best solution to like whether the 50% is minimized or how, how does that factor in with the lot coverage?
Vice Chair, that's a good question. It's also tricky because a lot of these existing lots are still allowed accessory buildings like a detached garage, detached carport, a pergola. Those things also count towards lot coverage too. And so by doing that, yes, I mean that I think is helpful, but there's also those other accessory buildings that it's hard to quantify,
Yeah.
because a lot of them, like a shed, for example, that digs into it and
Yeah.
things like that.
Correct.
I
And that-
wish we had the ability to revisit the lot coverage, because like, for the life of me, I don't understand why you can put more structures on a R35 than a DR43. More lot coverage and
I've always found it interesting because they're very close in square footage. They're the closest compared to any other zoning district, 8,000 square foot for the minimum lot size. And so, yeah, they should be very identical. And the fact that there is that 5% difference is interesting. But yeah,
Just to maintain open space, like in the more rural desert areas.
I didn't think about
I
that.
don't know,
Yeah.
from a zoning aspect, the tight,
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in general, in hindsight, too, Chairman Breckner, driving around and observing all the lots that are already developed in R18, R35 zones. A lot of them have a house and detached garage, a detached structure. So they're, I would not say, I mean, I'm not gonna say in confidence. I would just take a wild guess and say majority of them are probably already almost at their maximum lot coverage anyways. So.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, they're in more dense. I guess I'm a little sensitive to this because town has miszoned
Mhm. There's like islands
the
and
10-acre piece. Right.
Understood. The one that is
That is
Mhm.
not in the town core.
correct.
So that's a problem piece.
yeah, I went back to that map to kind of look, and yeah, that's definitely the biggest remaining piece that is strictly R35. There's a few larger ones kind of towards Carefree Highway, that little pocket off El Sendero north of Lowe's. Besides that, yeah, there's not too many that are that size, close to that size. So it's kind of, yeah,
It's an outlier.
it's an outlier. So
Since you were back on that slide, I have another thought again, it's a working session. It's only 600 lots, and I know it could be closer to 650. Is there a way to identify how many of these are actually located within a subdivision? Roughly, when you go through that analysis?
Yeah, Commissioner, that's a good question. I can definitely like do that, add in all the subdivisions. The ones I added were Rancho Manana, Black Mountain Shadows, Saguaro West, because those are really the large subdivisions. There's a few like 6 lot subdivisions here and there that are, pretty minimal, but I can definitely do that. But I would say Rancho Manana and Black Mountain Shadows are the two ones that really stand out as far as subdivisions where they'd have a hard time, I would say, putting in an accessory living quarters because they have the tight restrictions and they have their own HOA. They may have CCNRs, things like that. So
Right.
Okay.
okay, I'll move on to Hillside. And Stephen, you can take this one.
Got it. Thank you. Chairman Breckner, Vice Chair Miller, members of the commission. What I'm bringing before you today is the Hillside Lot Disturbance Inquiry. We are looking in amending sections of Chapter 7, Hillside Provisions. The amendments that are going to be made are just for clarification and minor amendments. There's nothing that's going to change the regulations. The only reason we're discussing this one is because this is really the only item that would be changing any regulations within the Hillside provisions. So as you see in the table provided, there's a set maximum lot hillside disturbance for every zoning district. At the moment right now, the zoning ordinance doesn't allow for lot coverage, disturbance for lot coverage and disturbance for areas not associated with lot coverage to be interchangeable. So meaning that disturbance for areas that are not associated with lot coverage would be like a pool, wall, driveway, etc. So if those areas are disturbed for a wall, pool, driveway for a DR 190 zoning district, you're limited to 5%. And it's a little bit, I wouldn't say silly, but say that you need additional disturbance, you're right at that 5% threshold. If you have a pool and we tell you, hey, just go ahead and throw a covered gazebo over it, that's going to take away that disturbance of the 5%. And so just say, like, for instance, if you're right at the 5% threshold because you want to do your pool, and we say, if you put a gazebo over, what does that account for? Well, that's 2% that will be accounted for that I can gain back in disturbance, which means that your total disturbance would be 3%. Now your total lot coverage would be 5%. So it's kind of, you're forced to do more coverage, and it just seems a little bit, I don't want to say silly. I understand the intent of the hillside provisions and the minimum disturbance so you don't scar the mountain. But at the same time, there have been developers that have challenges, and I'll go over one in this slide, of meeting the requirement and having to go back to design standards and invest time and money into plans. And as we know how this market's going with the materials of cost of labor, everything going up, it's cost them time, effort, and money. So that's just what we're looking at is how can we better this section of the ordinance to help out the members of the community. So are there any questions on this slide at the moment, or? So here's an example of a lot where they were close to the 5%. This one didn't have any issues with meeting compliance, but the reason I'm identifying this lot is because this is a DR 190 zoning where they're limited to 5% disturbance. So as you see, they have all that area preserved for open space in the rear of the property. And pretty much where all the development is at the front edge of the property, which again, it meets the intent of the hillside ordinance. But if they say, for example, if they needed to disturb more for their driveway, if they wanted to go a little bit higher on the house and they were at 6%, it just wouldn't work. But they would be at 6% disturbance and 1% lot coverage. So that'd be 7% disturbance in total, but they have 15% that they can disturb, but 10% is for lot coverage and 5% is for areas not associated with lot coverage. So it's just at this moment, the big discussion, the big challenge we have is are we going to be, I don't want to say encouraging to this to scar up the mountains more? That's more of a concern. I feel like that would be from the public and members of commission and council, but it's just at the same time, if they wanted to do more landscape, if they want to do a pool, if they want to do something, the 15% maximum is what we're trying to recommend to be allowed, regardless if they have 10% lot coverage and 5% disturbance, pretty much developing their envelope for all future development and all. So I'll go to the next slide to demonstrate what I'm really getting at is we have a lot here that has 6% lot coverage. So if you pay attention, or if you take a close look to the house at itself, that's 6% lot coverage. And where they're at right now is 4.99% disturbance. So again, disturbances area is not associated with lot coverage. So the driveway where it's paved, the area below here where they had to do some cut fill slopes and everything, and also do account for the pool, they're right at that 5% threshold. And the only reason why they were able to meet the 5% is because they had to revegetate and restore natural grade to recapture the disturbance calculation. So in this case, they had to do a little bit of extra legwork just to meet the minimum 5% allowed disturbance. So again, what this recommendation really is for is to allow the ability to go up to 15% without, regardless if you're going to take the whole 10% lot coverage or 5% disturbance. The intent overall would be you've disturbed your 15% maximum. All you can do left now is build buildings in that development envelope that's been established. So it's more of just trying to make it a little bit easier for the applicants. But again, there also is a challenge and a risk to scar up the mountain and not have any guarantee that buildings will be built anytime soon. So you could just be looking at a bladed area, which could be insightful, but that's why we're here to discuss if this is something worth amending in our ordinance or if we feel that how it is currently works. If the question is going to be, does it work at the moment? I would say that there aren't any issues, but it's still something to look into due to the amount of hillside properties that are still in the town and people acquiring the lots to build on. So,
Does it, as a question,
mhm.
on the previous screen, um, how often, because it seems that the lot coverage versus the disturbed, right? Are most of the structures falling way below the 10%?
So I'm asking that on required a permit, are the lot coverage, is it right at 10% or are they below?
They're typically way below.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Most of the problem that people are running into is the disturbance
Correct. That they're not able to develop the lot because they're
because of the
going to
disturbance.
exceed the disturbance. Correct.
I believe we were at one time 5% lot coverage for DR 190. I think we increased that to 10%. I think the reasoning was for a lot of the DR 190 lots are also flat for horse uses, and a lot of them have mare motels, barns,
Right.
shade structures.
Right.
That
We don't see that too often.
yeah.
On hillside.
Correct.
So most of the hillside are smaller lots.
They're right at DR1, right at 190,000, 89,000,
No, I'm saying
or
like
small.
most of the side lots that we have, smaller side, 1, 2 acre, R35, R18.
I'd say they're larger.
It's a mix. I would say the majority are DR 190. Over there on the west side off 38th Street, kind of if
Okay.
you look from Cave Creek Regional Park, kind of that area, and then a
Old
lot of
Stage Road.
random DR9,
Yeah.
DR190 off Spur Cross and Schoolhouse.
And again, it's just a thought that we're bringing items that are being brought to our attention from members of the public, and when they come in to build their residence. And again, there isn't necessarily a big issue.
Can we go back one more screen?
Mhm.
One more. Okay. I wonder, if you guys are able to identify if one particular size, zone is having more difficulty than others, based on the percentages that we have.
I would say DR 190 is probably the zone that
Has
has
the most.
most issues because they're limited to the 5%, which still 5% of
A lot.
is
yeah.
still.
Yeah.
I think the other reality is as we're getting closer to build out, the remaining lots are just unfortunately the harder lots to develop with higher slopes, or they have a weird configuration and they have, it seems like every hillside lot that's coming for a building permit has some form of challenge
Yeah.
now because that's all what's left.
So are we able to tackle this perhaps by having some form of a subjective decision similar to like a special use, where, the DR 190, has the ability to increase the 5% based on some kind of,
Some criteria.
submit an approval.
It's interesting because you could also argue that if they have some weird criteria going on, then they just should apply for a variance to increase their disturbance.
Right.
So it's, yeah, it's
I mean, that's a process though.
exactly. Yeah.
So I was thinking of maybe, is there a way to avoid the variance by keeping it within staff based on criterion? Similar to, I think we had that in the Hidden Canyon.
The
Where we had
acceptance?
we didn't need one for the grading and drainage because it was based on I think of how,
Staff's discretion
or the engineer, the town's engineer had it was basically not an exception if it was as the engineer decided, and that's how they ended up with the on-site retention, as I recall, and eliminated that as an exception.
there are items we could probably look into. I guess one would be not accounting the driveway towards disturbance because that's something you need. It's a necessity. So meaning that you still provide us disturbance calculation for the driveway. But we do-
The DR 190, they might have a
Yeah, understood. They might have almost,
200-foot driveway.
or we say that we will, the first 3,000 or first 2,500 square feet
Doesn't count.
does not account for you're allowed up to 2,500.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a way to kind of address this without taking the risk that we have this blade, big blade.
And that was one of the items that we discussed at staff levels, that if we allow them to do this, then yeah, you let them blade out their development envelope, but now you have a scar on the mountain. Is that something that meets the intent of the hillside provisions? And again, that's why we're here at a workshop, and that's something that if we don't feel that's in the best interest, then definitely we can not move forward with that item itself. We still have to amend certain things in chapter 7, but we don't have to move forward with that.
Well, we're in no
And-
hurry.
No,
So
no.
Maybe it's something that we can,
Yeah, talk on.
talk on more and take a look.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
where our problem areas are and whether there's alternatives as opposed to a blanket across the board.
correct. And my time here, it's not a lot, 5 years, but still inspecting hillside areas. A lot of developers, as you indicated, do long driveways so they can get to a buildable area. That's why I was thinking that maybe you don't knock them for having to do that lengthy of a driveway, or at least give them some credit and say that the first X amount does not account towards your disturbance. So I think that would help because the majority of their driveways do take up that
For sure.
disturbance calculation.
I think, these hillside lots, they're all different, and having some staff discretion, I think might make sense here without having to go through a variance process.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know, it's tough. I mean, in PV, we go through them all the time. They've got, it's almost like kind of our site plan review. You submit all the stuff, and then you have to go in front of like a whole board of town residents, just like this, I guess, commission. And they do have discretion over, what they feel is appropriate, and they can make, suggestions to it, kind of, it is a bit open-ended. And then, based on their approval, it goes through town and make sure everything all, the staff and make sure it all works. But I don't know. I mean, I just look at the hillside stuff. I mean, I think it's something to not take lightly. We all have to look at whatever
Right.
gets built on these
Right.
things. Stephen, I just wanted to make sure I'm following along, right? So you got your currently, I'm just looking at this top one here, hillside lot coverage. So I mean, that's just to be frank, it's like the house.
It's the house,
And we're giving them 10% for that.
10%.
Allocating it just, you got to fill in that box. Then you get 5% for your driveway, pool, everything else now right there, everything outside of the house, just to make it plain.
Correct.
That's it. And for total of 15. And you're proposing more like 15 in total, however you want to make your mix of your 10 and 5 or whatever lot coverage or hillside. It's just as long as you don't disturb more than 15%.
Correct. The proposal would be that if at the time of permitting, you say that your maximum, you're going to disturb the entire 15%, but you only have a lot coverage of, at the moment, 6%. They'll say you exceeded your maximum disturbance. What can you do left? The only thing you can do left is more structures.
I get what you're
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if the problem we're running into a lot is on the DR 190, having 19,000 square feet of lot coverage, maybe our solution is just to reduce that and increase the disturbance to 7%, or something like that.
That'd be a little bit challenging to look into doing. I mean, again, that's why we're talking about this as we
Yeah.
talk and think about it. We don't want to see a scar on the mountain. That's just the main thing. And again, I just think that maybe we can credit certain areas. I mean, because from what I've seen is a lot of hillside lots are required to do retaining walls. That's just how that's the standard of their development. That the engineers require it. Sometimes hillside lots won't work without retaining walls. Maybe crediting that if you're required to do it for that development standard, then you credit the retaining wall, you credit I mean, if you, again, we can't help that they're required to do it. So maybe we find credits where that we can say you had to do a retaining wall. It's not that you chose to do one. Maybe we get the linear feet, use our discretion and say we'll still give you X amount to do additional development within your lot. I mean, it's kind of fortunate that it would restrict them from doing a pool or any other development on the property. But intent really for the hillside is to really do your house and that's really pretty much the intent for the hillside properties, just because how challenging development is in those areas. So, I mean, that's something we could look into is maybe what areas could we exempt, not necessarily exempt disturbance, but say that if you're required to do a retaining wall, that the linear feet that we will credit is, 2,500 as well. Maybe we just get a number down for that and say that for the first 2,500 of retaining wall, we won't account towards your disturbance, something to that extent. But those are just ideas we could look into. But
I'd be curious to compare it to just some other, like just quick comparisons to some of the other,
to other jurisdictions and
whether it's PV or Scottsdale or Phoenix, or even like just county,
Mhm.
and just see what's successful on all ends. Like in like Clearwater Hills and down in Paradise Valley is like a county island, and it's amazing it's like the Wild West over there. They're like just they can just slice into the mountain, do whatever they want, pretty much.
I think what you stated earlier, I think there are some hillside committees where they still take the plans to. I think the state law prevents them from denying the plan. I just think that they have the ability to make recommendations and they still have their own hillside, apologize, their own hillside ordinances that have to be followed, and that's something that they have the ability to do. But I think based off our hillside ordinance that it really does prevent the scarring of the mountains. So again, it's not something we have to look more into. I just think that maybe we can get creative and find out what we can credit for them to give them just a little bit more disturbance to do something as far as like a pool or a perimeter wall or something to that extent, something further for the property.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So just for clarification, Stephen, so for example, we'll just take the top row again. where the disturbance is up to 5%, right?
Mhm.
So if they were to develop it and the disturbance ended up being 7%, they would have to revegetate at least 2% of it to get back to 5.
They would have to re-veg and restore the area to natural grade.
Okay.
And then at that time, they would have to provide us, an engineer would actually have to go out there and assure that they restored it to natural grade, give us an as-built plan demonstrating that they revegetated that amount that they were required to and actually restored it to natural grade as well. So that is an option they can do as well.
Yeah.
So,
And I can see that, and that's not a bad thing, I guess,
Mhm.
because now they're restoring it. But if we change that, right, they could theoretically, we change again this to 15% total, they could build on the lot could be 2%, and the other could be 13% of bladed desert, right?
correct, 2% lot
Yeah.
coverage and then you blade and now you have, again, this, and I'll repeat it, sorry, but it's just the best way to put it is a scar on the mountain. And
Yeah, and I think that would probably not make a lot of those neighbors happy.
correct.
A lot of the residents of the town have to drive by and see that over and over
Mhm.
again. So I'm guessing there was a reason that these percentages were put in place
In the
at
nor-
time.
For sure.
You know,
It just seems like we'd be making an across the board change to deal with one category that's causing us problems.
Understood. In the normal practice, which I'm glad you mentioned it, Commissioner Addison, is to re-veg and restore to natural grade if they need to recapture additional disturbance. So, I mean, we could stick to the normal practice that we've been doing and just require that. It works. It's, again, there's just sometimes it's a little bit challenging, but always the question is going to be, does it still work? It works with that practice we've been
and,
doing.
and I think as you said earlier that you really haven't seen a lot of this, right? That a lot of issues with this.
Since I've started, probably about 5 times a year, but since Eric started, it's kind of been more of like the norm, kind of, you think, or not really? With hillside properties.
Yeah.
Having a challenge to meet that disturbance, but again, there are ways to work around it, which is to re-veg and restore to natural grade.
Some of the challenge might be related to the cost of building now versus back then.
Correct.
And Chair, I want to check what Vice Chair Miller said about other municipalities. I was thinking about that because I know Carefree, for example, it's 20% is their hillside. Ours is 15, where we can think about, okay, if the slope, let's say, is 40%, obviously we don't want them to go more than 5% disturbance. If it's 30%, same thing. But if it's 15 is where it's at, maybe, it's something like that where it's tiered based off of the slope itself. So obviously the higher you get, the less disturbance it is. Cause I know that's, I think what
PVs is.
PVs is and
Yeah.
other
Guys,
municipalities.
the slope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
Correct.
chart.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
tying into the slope.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to think about is just, I mean, what is the stance of like, are we trying to make it easier for people to like,
Yeah.
there is like, Josh would disagree with me because he developed a hillside house, but like, there is a point of like, I mean, should be inherently kind of tough to build a hillside house. Like,
Yeah.
We
we
shouldn't,
want you to do it right. And so we don't want it to be an easy process.
the restriction,
I mean, like, I don't want to sound
yeah,
negative here, but like,
well, the provisions should be strict for that reason because, I mean, everyone can see your lots. And that's just, and the intent of our hillside ordinance, I feel, has done a great job of not scarring up the mountains as much. So if we move this route, is that a fear that will happen? And not speaking for all of you up there
To that
that
end, are we ready to to actually consider this next month or?
yeah, I'm confident we are. Again, because with the hillside section, all of it is clearing up some items that are I would say are vague and not clear. And so that's all we're doing. This is really just a major item. Again, if this is something that what I'm gathering, that's why we're doing a workshop, which I'm gathering is a big concern. We don't have to bring that section. We can keep it as is. What's up?
I feel like we need another workshop on both.
Yeah.
Well, when we
I mean, I mean, and this is what I mentioned earlier, but that was my concern, so, but I realize it's been noticed out. Right,
Mhm.
for me.
Yeah, we sent no. Yeah. Yeah, we've sent some items out and asked for, but again, at that time, that's why we're doing this work session as far as what we feel is an item. And again, with or concerns, and what I've got as far as jotted down as items for the accessory dwelling unit is 3 items, and then with the hillside, really is this is just really the big concern that we're dealing with. And again, it's an easy one that we can fix and not just leave it alone
Yeah.
because it works. I mean, if we look around right now and look at the hillside lots, the main question is going to be asked, does it work? Are there any other issues that we're seeing? And does it work? My answer is going to say it does work. So why change it? It's just an item that's been brought up
Yeah.
probably within the last 3 years. And that's what we're doing these amendments for, is take the opportunity to look into amending
I
it.
know, I know. It's just when we tee it up for a vote on a text amendment change, right? Ultimately, we're pushing something to a vote that we may not want to push to a vote.
And at that time, we would be able to continue it and to.
I know, but
Mhm.
now we're in a position of continuing and then ultimately making a recommendation, then it goes to the town council for a vote. When we may not have wanted to send something to a vote
Mhm.
in the first place.
Understood. And if we feel that we aren't prepared, really, there's only been one publication, which is our utility bills, which we can, and the newspaper ad, and I can easily contact the newspaper ad and ask them to withdraw that publication.
Okay.
And then anyone that contacts with utility bill, I can say that it's canceled, and we'll just post online that that meeting
Okay.
is going to be canceled,
Okay.
unless you want to use that opportunity to do a workshop on
We
that
still
day.
have the landscape undisturbed and commercial.
Correct. There's going to be another item, which is landscape undisturbed, which is an easier topic to discuss, but we can use that opportunity to make it another work session. And
I mean, if we're already here, I think that might make sense, assuming we have the other commissioners here. I think they may want to chime in on it too, but I'm hesitant to have a yes or no recommendation that sends something to the council for a vote.
Mhm.
You know, when we may not even want to put ourselves in that position.
understood. And again, that's why we're meeting today. Again, the only really publication we did was in the utility bill. I can easily pull request for the publication and newspaper ad to be pulled.
Maybe let's do that.
Okay.
We'll use that time as.
I'll send them an email once I get into the office.
I'd like for us to just make a better case of what we really want on that thing.
For the hillside or for the, for both?
You know, just like
I think that makes sense.
Mhm.
because I just wonder, like, yeah, if we all put this to vote, and we all said, yeah, great, whatever, with the council.
Or we
leaving,
said
like,
no, and then the council can say, well, we.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so I'm hesitant to go there.
So from what I'm understanding is or take away the May meeting, but make that another joint work session meeting to
There's
just.
still a public hearing for the
Public hearing on the one, on the,
So you're okay with hearing one?
no,
No,
there was a third item.
yes.
Right,
correct.
so that third item, so the ADUs and the hillside workshop,
Yes.
the other item,
Can be heard.
yeah.
Okay, so you still want to do a public hearing then? We'll just,
For the one.
correct, and we'll just, okay, then I'll amend the publication and newspaper ad.
Okay,
Okay?
and with that, are you done?
That would conclude. I didn't have anything else other than just what we'd recommend, but that's it.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.